Also going to get into, folks, all the latest in Mets land, having everything to do with, yes, you guessed it, Juan Soto. We're going to get into the latest on Juan, where things currently stand in the sweepstakes, how there are multiple teams looking like that they already have north of $700+ million on the table. Do the Mets already have a contract offer potentially leaked out there? We're going to touch a bit more on that. Then from there, not only the latest on Juan Soto, we're also going to get into Frankie Montas was officially acquired by the Mets today, announced, and he had his little media presser. We're going to get into Montas' key takeaways at his recruitment that he's trying to do with his good buddy and Manaea. From there, we're also going to bring in right around 20 minutes from the time being live here on the beat for the Amazons through the Athletic. Sammon will be joining the show. They share his input and updates on Juan Soto, on what is next for the rotation, potentially including Manaea or not. What can the Mets do if they land Soto? What can they do if they don't land Soto in either of those hypothetical situations? As we are just right around 48 hours or so away from finding out where Juan Soto will be playing for potentially the next 10, 15 plus years. How you doing, everybody? Thank you so much for spending your evening here Friday night with me. I greatly appreciate that. It's always humbling and always appreciated to see the hundreds to then thousands of you guys that watch me every single night. Always grateful, always appreciative, and more than anything, I'm just very excited to get into this one, having everything to do in the latest in these Juan Soto sweepstakes. But before we deep dive it all, everybody, before we get into some remarks on Frankie Montas, which I would like to highlight to start the live show, and then from there, we'll get into more on Soto and everything in between. Thank you so much for smashing that like and subscribe on it. If you haven't already, folks, it really does mean a lot. And now let me do a quick roll call to everyone first chiming in live on a replay. We got Haram Wallace, great members. Scott H, how you doing? Ciro, how you doing? Johnny, Alan Gonzalez, the Jinx Buster himself, if you know, you know. BC, Buzz Talk Live, Brandon Gray, hope you are doing fantastic, my man. Last show before we know, I hope so. I really do hope so, Brandon. God willing. Eugene, how you doing? Going up the list here, Luis King Fuego, longtime follower, how you doing, brother? Brendan, David, Figueroa, how you doing? John Rossi, great longtime follower here. Roy, how you doing? BC, how you doing? Bionic, Eugene, going up the list. Kevin Weiss, great member, going up here. Chris Todd, Mike C, Jason, going down here. We got Anthony, how you? Swaggenberger, how you doing? Thank you so much for taking the time. Truman Quinn, Chris Todd, if I didn't say him already. Mostly Mets, going up the list here. Matthew Martell, Mr. Chicken, Albert Gutierrez, thank you so much for becoming a new member here on the channel. I greatly appreciate that. Wishing the best for you and your family, my friend. Hope you are well. Thomas C, Rick Jason, thank you guys so much. Mike Nixon, longtime great member and moderator. Luis Gonzalez, thank you so much for spending this evening with me, folks. So now let's deep dive the latest in Mets land, everybody. Let's get into this one, and let's start off with the latest that we saw there on Frankie Montas. I think that's an easy way to highlight things first and then get into the bulk of the discussion, which will be on Soto, the rotation, and more so that we're going to have with our buddy Will Sammon shortly. Frank Sessa, thank you so much for the $2 donation. Great member. I really appreciate that. Corey, how are you, my friend? Thank you for chiming in. Brendan, Vinny, Mike D, Murdoch, Baseball Kids, you guys are absolutely amazing. We appreciate you greatly. Morning Beer Podcast, how are you? Chris Goodwin, an absolute fantastic follower. D74, you guys are amazing. But all right, guys, Frankie Montas is officially a New York Met. I know all of you were dying for Frankie to land with the Mets this offseason. Cue the crickets, because I know no one was really expecting or hoping, other than my man James Shiano, for Frankie Montas to essentially be a Met. But now he is at $72 million average annual value for the 2025 and potentially 2026 season. So let's hear a little bit on Frankie Montas, his thoughts on not only now landing with the Mets, but also trying to bring in his former teammate and great friend and Manaea from their time with the then Oakland Athletics.
Conversations with the Mets, what did they tell you about ideas they had and ways they can make you better than you've been the last couple of years?
To be honest, that was one of the things that really caught my attention. Obviously, before I even agreed with them, I talked to some Manaea. You know, Manaea is one of my best friends. I spoke to Severino too, and they have nothing but good things to say about the way they do things in there. You know, the way, all the resources they have to kind of take your game to the next level, you know, and I got to see a little bit of it when I was in New York this couple of days. You know, the way they do stuff, the way they prepare guys, the way they help you with your recovery, all the resources they have to improve your game, you know. So I'm definitely really excited for next year and see how good they can definitely help me improve my game.
So the end of that sentence, that final quote, is very important to me. How they can help me improve my game. And what stands out about this is what we've emphasized on the platform all offseason long and throughout the course of the season is that Mets pitching lab. Now, we've heard Sean Manaea and Luis Severino speak glowingly of the organization, and Sean, who has a long-lasting friendship and a great rapport there with Frankie Montas, is obviously hoping that the Samoan Southpaw returns to pair with Montas, this time not there with the Athletics, but with the Mets. And also, we know that the Athletics did try to pursue Sean Manaea before ultimately signing Luis Severino to that 3-year at $67 million total value of a contract, the largest in A's history, which is insane to say, but that is certainly the case. But Montas, he knows that coming to Mets, that they have a pitching lab. They have a fantastic rapport. What they have been doing over the past couple years to get the best out of their pitchers. And even though it doesn't work for everybody, the Mets saw a lot of proper adjustments that the Brewers made with Montas in the second half of the 2024 season, going from Cincinnati there to the Brewers staying in the division in the NL Central. And the Mets are not only banking on those in-season adjustments by Montas, but ultimately my apologies, everybody, but ultimately his ability to go out there and be sustainable, be consistent as a guy who had 30-plus starts this past year in his first season back after a significant shoulder injury, banking on him coming back after his second year of post-injury now. So hopefully things are continuing to trend upward for Frankie Montas, who sits right around in the 70th percentile in fastball velocity, right around 96 miles per hour is what you're getting with Frankie. So there are actually some similarities between himself and Luis Severino and how they profiled in their previous years before landing with the Mets. But Montas had a far greater 2024 than what Severino did in 2023 with the Yankees before landing for the Mets, the same way that Montas is now landing with the Mets for this upcoming season. There's plenty upside here, and to have him pair with Sean Manaea, I don't think anyone would be complaining about that. A lot of us want to see the Samoan Southpaw back in this Mets rotation, and for great reason. Let me know in the chat, everybody. One, what are your initial impressions of Frankie Montas? I'm going to ask Mets beat writer Will Sammon shortly the exact same thing, because he had questions that he asked and got answered from Frankie one-on-one today in their media presser through SNY and the Mets themselves today. But I want to know what are your initial thoughts not only on Frankie, but also on him hopefully helping the recruitment process, bringing back Sean Manaea at least for the next couple years, with the assumption that the Mets could hopefully ink a deal that isn't at 4 years, which I'm sure Manaea wants a 100+ million. I'm sure the Mets don't want to go anything past 3 at absolute most, probably more comfortable with 2 than anything. But I know it's a really expensive pitching market, so not surprising that the teams, including the Mets, are going to have to get a little bit creative here. Not that money is a big problem, but more so the Mets have a confidence that they don't need to overspend for certain starters when they can get similar, if not better, production out of the guys at lesser values. That is how you do a fantastic job with your in-house lab, that pitching lab, among other things. But
hey, Frankie, in your conversations with the Mets,
what real quick, because that was obnoxiously loud in my eardrum. Let's also hear some further remarks here on Frankie Montas to share, everybody. And also, shout out to my man Kicking It with Keith, big time follower of mine, also a Mets creator. Keith did a fantastic job translating Frankie Montas, sharing his thoughts on Juan Soto, folks. So listen up to this, and then I'll share what exactly.
¿Te gustaría tener a Soto en tu equipo?
¿A quién no? Claro que sí, claro que sí. Yo creo que a todo el mundo le gustaría tener un pelotero como ese en su equipo, ¿me entiendes? Pero son cosas que ya están aparte de él, ¿me entiendes? Él sabe para dónde quiere ir. Yo si tuviera el placer de hablar con él y dijera, hey, vente para acá, para los Mets, que aquí sí hay cosas buenas y es un equipo que definitely va a querer ganar.
¿Te gusta?
Okay, so what Frankie Montas said, for people who don't speak Spanish, including myself, it is the following. Shout out to my man Keith again for the translation here. Really appreciate that. It says, Frankie Montas' thoughts on potential of Juan Soto to the Mets. He says, man, who wouldn't want a baseball player of that caliber here? The whole world will want that type of player on their team. Now this is up to him. This is his path on where he wants to go. If I could send him a message, it would be, this is a good place to be. Trust me, this is a place that is going to win. Frankie hasn't even stepped on Citi Field as a New York Met yet, and he's already trying to have a little bit of a pitch. This is a good place to be. I just signed here for a reason. I know that you're in a completely different stratosphere of a player, but that doesn't matter. I'm Frankie Montas, and I want you, Juan Soto. So I appreciate that a lot. It was interesting to hear Frankie ask that, but I'm not really surprised at the same time. It goes in hand with just this entire sweepstakes right now. It's the talk of the town. Even in a presser like Montas, you're obviously going to hear things of that nature. So happy to have Frankie aboard, obviously. Looking to see the upside of the Mets can hopefully get the best out of him in 2020, 2025 and beyond. So everybody, we'll talk a little bit more on the rotation with Will Sammon here here in the next 10 minutes or so once he comes in. But now let's get into, everybody, some remarks shared actually from Jim Duquette, former Mets GM there on the panel with SNY earlier today. He highlighted something in the first half of this clip that I want to share with you all, because this is not only what I've been assuming, but kind of reaffirmed that belief. So let's hear from Jim Duquette on the latest with Juan Soto, with an emphasis on team meetings.
Jim, obviously something's got to be going on here. What is the latest on Juan Soto?
Here's a little bit of news. I think coming out of Boston anyway, their hope was to try to get a second meeting. Everyone's had one meeting that's left here. They were hoping to get a second meeting. They were hoping that being able to have that meeting would have give him a better chance of getting him to sign. So there was a little frustration that had not happened there in Boston. In New York, I don't think it's frustration. I think they would like to have a second meeting too. It's been pretty quiet on that front. Here's the thing I can tell you from dealing with Boris in the past and watching how he negotiates with other contracts. They may not get a second chance to have a meeting in person with Juan Soto. This is more his style, and that's how he kind of treats the negotiation. So, I think on that part of it, I don't think there'll be a second meeting. I'd be very surprised if there is. There's a lot of rumors out there about a $700 million offer, 14, 15 years. Again, in terms of where that dollar amount is going to go, if that rumor is out there and it's true, and it's very rare to have that kind of be truthful out there, because there's only a few people that have it, and Scott Boras wouldn't want that necessarily out there. It's only going to go higher than that. So I think that rumor out there, I'm not sure exactly where it lies right now, but I think that would benefit the two New York teams. I don't think Boston's appetite to stay there. And there's also this perception or feeling, at least for the Yankees still, because I heard it again this afternoon, Sal, that they feel like they don't have to have the highest offer to get Soto because of the fact that he was with them this past year.
I hope the Yanks are banking on not needing to be the top bidder for Juan Soto. I hope that's the case, because in the end, if Soto goes to the Yankees, that further proves their pull that they had from acquiring him a year ago. That further reaffirms why it made so much sense for them to trade for him, and it is what it is. As heartbreaking as it'll be for me as a Mets fan, I will move on in life. But seeing this, hearing that remark, what we have been reaffirmed constantly, even through Jack Curry of Yes Network of recent, is that the Yankees are comfortable where they're at. They're comfortable in the pitch that they've had to this point, and they're really, feeling solid about the situation. That reeks of a team that is obviously having a hard line in the sand, is only willing to go so far. The Red Sox, who we emphasized in a quote earlier from their GM and Craig Breslow, that we can emphasize again, how Craig said, that we shouldn't be essentially having our offseason success contingent on landing one player, right? And that goes in hand to a degree with Juan Soto in the sweepstakes. Jim relays obviously the $700 million 15-year offer. That's been the rumbling that's been around. He says he doesn't know where it's coming from. He obviously does. He just can't say it is, because this is initially stemming from the video that we did earlier today on the channel, which had everything to do with, surprisingly enough, Carlos Mendoza's son, supposedly. Now, I broke this down in my video earlier, so I'm going to be fairly quick with this. But as you see to the left, this comes from a TikTok comment section and the Bleacher Report walk-off account that they have there. Shout out to BR, great friends here, as I do reoccurring segments with BR as a MLB-wide and Mets-centered host for them. You guys see to the left, Soto to the Sox in the comments, and this guy Adrian replies, Mets offer him 700 over 15, so no. He further he further replies and says, do you know who I am? And then you look at the account. It's Adrian M 2864. Adrian M standing for Adrian Mendoza, Carlos Mendoza's 12-year-old son. He has two sons, him and Andres. See the profile photo right there. It's Adrian, Andres, and Carlos. Then you see Carlos there with the number 28. Mind you, Mendoza started as 28, and then he shifted into 64 for his number as manager for the Mets this past season. There were also videos on this specific TikTok account that had himself warming up with Francisco Lindor and other young kids. Really, only way that can happen is if you have access, because say you are the son of Carlos Mendoza. Now, there were a lot of rumblings as to if this was accurate or not last night. That's why I didn't make a video on it right away. However, we come to find out today that since the account has been deactivated, I saw the account with my own eyes on TikTok last night and earlier this morning before we saw it officially no longer there. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that this is likely true, a potential leak that's hilarious for it to come out of Carlos Mendoza's son's, mouth or fingertips, what have you at this point in time. time. But yes, that is where the supposed leak comes from, is from exactly this, and people have ran with it since then. But I think there's something to be said about the fact that both the comments and the account itself have been taken down and deactivated at minimum since this blew up last night, when people started to pick up on it from everything I know. So the screenshots that you currently see are my own actual screenshots as well. So this is not me trying to throw this out there and say, oh, you know, I didn't even see where the source came from. No, I went and did my due diligence myself yesterday. I'm hoping everything's fine with Adrian Andres, both of Mendoza's sons. Obviously, should this be true, I'm sure that he had a conversation with Carlos, and I'm not sure it was overly positive, but hopefully it was nothing too negative. Just like, all right, is what it is. Got to take that down now. Just don't do that going forward for obvious reasons. It also reminds me eerily similar of a situation that happened with a Texas Rangers coach, his son, a couple years ago, when the Rangers were going to sign like Brad Miller. I remember it was broken by one of his sons on social media as well, and then he deleted it and deactivated after 2, if I'm not mistaken. This was a couple off seasons ago, while I was still actively covering the Mets. So it's since the startup of Steve Cohen as owner. But these things do tend to happen every once in a while. Hopefully, again, no one got hurt in it, anything like that. Mendy was pissed per Martia. I did not see anything to suggest that at all. That's a complete lie. Goomba with the $5 holla says, though, fun math, Cohen makes $3 billion a year. That's $250 million per month, $62 million per week. Must be nice. He can give Soto $50 to $55 million a year, and that's 5 days pay for him. That's liquid, not assets. You're not wrong, Goomba. And again, there's a difference when you have an owner at Steve Cohen with a current net worth of $22 billion, while you have the Yankees Steinbrenner only where they're at, and then you have there in John Henry, who's at a net worth right now, I believe, of $6 billion. Yes, net worth is not the same as salary. It's not the same as what you actually have saved. That is true. But there's a lot to be said about Steve Cohen being widely known as the wealthiest Major League Baseball owner in the game by a wide margin. This is where he can really flex the guns here. And again, if it comes down to money, which everything has led to believe to this point, that's coming down to money. That's why we're hearing reporting to literally say, okay, there are now 4 teams across, according to multiple reports, there are 4 teams that have offered right around the realm of $700 million, not including the Dodgers. So you could probably exclude LA at this point, not officially, but unofficially, with the Blue Jays, the Red Sox, the Mets, and the Yankees. So pretty much all of the AL East, not named the Orioles and the Rays, and then you have the Mets in the mix. And that's it right now. That we know reportedly to this point. We also know that you guys are going to see here as well. I'm not sure if he actually says it in this clip or not before we bring in Will Sammon in a second, as this was reiterated from John Heyman on his daily segment that he does in the Bleacher Report app. Shout out to John. But then he also did note that I want to highlight for you guys too, you know, that we could see, again, at least 4 teams right now in the ballpark of 15 years, $700+ million. So let's listen in on this quote from John Heyman, because John, he might not have officially quoted it in this. However, he did say on his live stream today that the Mets are going to have to up their offer. And what that stands out to me is the Mets had the top offer in round 1 and or 2 negotiation, and now everyone is kind of meeting the Mets there around 700. So obviously they're going to have to continue to go toe for toe. We all know that John is a notorious mouthpiece for Scott Boras as well. I mean, that goes without saying. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a further leverage play to say, hey, how much more can we get out of you, Steve Cohen? Even if I am in fact going to come here, I know that I'm getting at least 700 million right now, but let's take things north of 750, which has been the belief over the past 24 to 48 hours, at least reportedly. So let's hear John Heyman's remarks here, and then we'll bring in our guy, Will Sammon.
Is Mendoza's son report accurate? All right, let's get into that. Look, I can't tell you whether that's actually Adrian Mendoza or not.
Isn't that hilarious? How like little it cracks me up so much how we got to the point where we're so desperate, but also it's kind of a big deal if it literally is his son. It's hard to just refute that as if it means nothing, when out of all people that could be connected that could hear something, why wouldn't little Adrian Mendoza be able to hear something, right? But regardless, I digress. Let's hear what John has to say.
Some internet sleuth claimed that he told somebody that they've offered $700 million for 15 years. I think it's in the ballpark for all those 4 teams. I think that is not a shocker. I think that's where we are now. You know, I think he's going to set a record unless by chance, and at this point, the Dodgers are probably the long shot in this. If by chance he says, you know what, I'm not so interested in an extra 30, 40, 50, 60 million. It's not a big deal to me. I want to go to the best team. So they're still in it as far as I know. Obviously, he probably got a pecking order. He's got the strengths and weaknesses, the pros and cons laid out in front of him. And he certainly knows at this point, which are the top 2 or 3 teams. But this is an unusual situation because normally you don't have 5 teams fighting on really equal ground. At least 4 of them are equal.
So 4 at equal ground in regards to where things currently stand, what we know publicly. Now, I'm going to expand on that in a second with Will, but I'm really curious to each and every one of you that just heard those remarks from John Heyman that have been following along with the Soto sweepstakes all off season long at this point. My simple question to all you guys to the north of 1,000 watching live and to the thousands that watch this on replay inevitably is the following. Do you think that a lot of what we have heard in the reporting has been nothing more than smoke, a lot of regurgitated saying the same exact thing, but because you heard it from a different mouthpiece, so you have a different impression on it? Or do you think that a lot of this has been accurate and that this is a public back and forth that we are seeing transpire before our very eyes in a true bidding war for Juan Soto between the Blue Jays, the Mets, the Yankees, and the Red Sox? Let me know how you feel about the sweepstakes in general, everybody. Doesn't mean he really knows. No, I understand that as well, but normally when he says these things, it goes in hand with at least what he is being relayed, and there is good reason for that. But no less, everybody, let's now bring in our guy, Will Sammon, and hear what he has to say on the Amazons. Okay. Will, can you hear me?
Hey, Tyler. How's it going, man?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on. A couple days before the winter meetings get going.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for winter meetings too. We're just a couple days away now, and I know it's going to be a very busy time for you, as it will be for me and everyone else in the baseball space. So first, shout out to you, Will. I really appreciate you coming on. For those that don't know, Will Sammon, Will has been covering the Mets on the beat through The Athletic over the past couple years. And Will, my first question to you right away is, what has the entire experience been like for you now getting an opportunity to work with the Mets after, if I'm not mistaken, with the Brewers prior, correct?
Yeah, so I've been with the Athletic since 2018. I started covering college football for them because that's where I kind of started my career. And then in 2020, I started covering the Milwaukee Brewers. So I covered David Stearns for a couple of years before shifting over to the Mets. And it's a lot different, I would say. The beat's much larger. Plus, you're dealing with a whole different sort of set of players that could be coming every winter. So Milwaukee, we're kind of confined to a group or a segment of free agency. Here, everybody is pretty much up for grabs, depending on the Mets' appetite for them.
Yeah, oh, for sure, especially in the differences from how Milwaukee has been ran a number of years versus now Will Ponzing regime, now Steve Cohen regime Mets, where it's a complete 180 in their ability to spend and having that financial flexibility. And speaking of financial flexibility, I think this is a perfect pivot. Of course, we're going to talk about Juan Soto. So, Will, I want to ask, one, what has been your impression from everything that you've heard to this point on the Juan Soto sweepstakes, on where things currently stand there? And secondly, I really want to know your personal opinion and prediction. Where do you think Juan Soto is going to land, and what is your contract prediction for the fun of it?
Yeah, so I think anytime I talk to an executive from like different teams or head honchos from different teams, everybody sort of says the same thing. And like, I think people are tired of hearing it at this point, but it is what gets said. And that's, people have a hard time seeing another team outbid Steve Cohen for this type of talent. And that, again, I know people are kind of tired of hearing that line, but that's been pretty much the general consensus from people in the baseball industry. That's why you hear it so often.
Right.
That's why it gets repeated so frequently. So that's kind of the gist of it. But on the other hand, I just have a hard time counting out the Yankees, just because the guy spent a season there in which he had an outstanding platform year. It worked. And I know his bat works everywhere, but it worked at Yankee Stadium. It worked with the Yankees. They went all the way to the World Series. So it was a successful season by all accounts. And it seemed like he enjoyed things there as well. So I think the challenge for the Mets could be just that, how they combat the familiarity that Soto has with the Yankees. He already knows what he's getting with that group. Now, I would assume, just from knowing and doing the reporting on different sort of free agency pursuits in the past with Steve Cohen and the Mets, that Steve Cohen probably made quite an impression on Juan Soto. That would be I probably would bet a large sum of money on that if I was a betting person, just based on what I know and how he conducts those types of interviews or those types of meetings with people that he's interested in getting to know at that level. And I don't think anybody should be surprised if people have paid attention to Steve Cohen as an owner for the Mets, because at this point, he's no longer a wild card, and he's not really viewed as that in the industry. He's viewed as somebody that's willing to go all in on his investment in the Mets, and his wealth isn't predicated on the Mets. Like, he's been rich. He's been rich for a long time, and his wealth has not come from being the Mets owner. So this is a different type of situation for Steve Cohen, and he's a different type of owner, I think, than some others. And Juan Soto values that. Clearly, that came right from Scott Boras's mouth at the GM meetings, is that he wants a relationship with ownership. So in that regard, I like the Mets' chances, but I feel like the familiarity is kind of becoming kind of a big obstacle. And it's one of those things that I just don't think is talked about enough, just because I think people have been quick to sort of dismiss the Yankees or eager to talk about different teams, whether it's the Red Sox or the Mets or whoever. So at the end of the day, I've been pretty consistent with my prediction of him actually returning to the Yankees. And that's nothing more than a gut sort of opinion, like you said. So it's not reported. It's nothing like anything like that other than speculative. On
Breaking news, Will Sammon has the latest on Juan Soto.
Not this time.
Okay, so if you had to go contract prediction-wise, what are you feeling at this point in time? Because we're seeing the rumblings of 15 years, 700. Could he get to 750? I'd imagine that should what guys like John Heyman of the New York Post are relaying right now of at least 4 teams in that 700 realm. Should that in fact be true, then naturally things are going to continue to rise, right? So I'd imagine that we could push north of that 750 range. Do you see that as being the case? Do you see it less? Do you see it more? How are you feeling at this point in time?
I do. At this point, I would be surprised. Clearly, if it's not, it's going to be over 700, it seems. And I would be surprised if it's not around 750 based on what we've heard, which is getting kind of crazy.
It is getting crazy.
It's surpassed crazy, right? Like it's already surpassed that. But those are the numbers that you hear, or at least I've been hearing, particularly today. So that's what's been thrown out there. I have no reason to think that it will be anything less than those types of figures.
So one thing that I really liked that I want to highlight from your first breakdown on Soto was the ownership aspect and that relationship, right? Because we heard rumblings that apparently the Mets and Steve Cohen may have had Scott Boras, Juan Soto and company as Beverly Hills Mansion, whereas that isn't necessarily true with any other team throughout the negotiation process, at least in round 1 there in LA that we know publicly to this point. We know that he has rolled out the red carpet constantly for guys, whether it has been and Yoshinobu Yamamoto back at his place in Connecticut last year and then going to Japan the way that he did. We've seen it to an extent even with guys who stayed in-house, and Edwin Diaz, Brandon Nimmo, giving them the luxurious type treatment that he has. What can you say about the firsthand approach that Steve Cohen has had as an owner in comparison of really the rival owners, especially right now in the Soto sweepstakes, and one in Hal Steinbrenner, which we know how he's operated has been more on the current conservative front in comparison to his father during his long time with the Yankees, in comparison to also John Henry. He hasn't spent too much the past number of years. Why should we believe that there's a further willingness when a report even came out yesterday which suggested that Henry himself may have not yet met with Soto face to face for meetings? What do you have to say at where Steve Cohen lands as being personable in a way that maybe other owners simply can't relate to?
Well, first, Steve Cohen has already demonstrated that he's willing to do whatever it takes to field a winning club. It hasn't necessarily happened on a consistent basis for the Mets yet, but they're headed in the right direction, and he's starting to get more yeses than he used to as an owner. And that started obviously with David Stearns, or we could even argue it started way back with other guys like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, those types of guys. But for the pursuits that he kind of failed at, whether it was president of baseball operations or whatever it was, he's starting to get more yeses, and that's, David Stearns and, who knows, perhaps even Juan Soto at this point. But I feel like he takes a really measured sort of, very detailed approach to these sort of free agencies. Like, he's not somebody that I think really flaunts his wealth, from what I understand, because look, everybody in that room already knows how wealthy the man is.
He doesn't need to be like, yeah, I'm worth $22 billion.
Yeah,
we know
he's not somebody that, I think sometimes people have this like cartoonish character of Steve Cohen in their mind of like this big money guy. And it's like, when you meet him and like when you hear stories about how he conducts himself, it's a lot more, I don't know, it's just a lot more personable than that.
Oh,
like you're just...
We have breaking news regarding the Mets, Will, that you're going to report on. The Mets have just signed Clay Holmes, pending a physical. There you go. We have breaking news.
Waiting, huh?
Okay, so there you go. Well, if you have to run because of this, that's completely fine. Otherwise, I'm just going to transition this now into a Clay Holmes segment, because that is now what it's going to become, especially with him as a starter.
Yeah, I'll add quickly though for you guys that with Clay Holmes, I see that Joel Sherman's reporting that now actually, but yeah, with Clay Holmes, man, they liked him a lot as a starter from what I understand. I'm not sure if he's signing to be a starter or a reliever at this point,
right?
But they did really like him. They met with him, of course. That's why they're agreeing with him, it seems. So I'm going to jump on reporting that, but I appreciate the time, man. Sorry that we had to cut it short.
Not a problem at all, Will. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll talk again real soon.
All right, man. You got it.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it. Shout out to Will Sammon. We got breaking news live on this segment, baby. Clay Holmes is a New York Metropolitan. Apologies, everybody. I was just getting things set up right here, right now. Breaking news, folks. The Mets have officially landed. Yes, you heard that correctly. They have landed Clay Holmes. And I absolutely love it. I love the deal. I love the AEV. And I love the fact that the Mets just brought in now a former New York Yankee who was just working the past 2 seasons with Desi Druskull / Trushell, however you pronounce his last name, because I still don't know which one it is. I apologize. Who was a Yankees assistant pitching coach over the past couple years, working on his pitch shape and working on his arsenal well with Holmes. Now he will be rekindling that relationship between Clay, between Desi, now with Jeremy Hefner in the fold. Carlos Mendoza rekindles that relationship. I like it a lot, because here's the thing. The Mets are in a position where they can stretch Holmes as a starter. And if it doesn't work out, then, at absolute worst, he's going to be your dominant setup option for Edwin Diaz for the next couple years. I'm not complaining about that whatsoever. Really, really like the craftiness of it. This reeks of Ronaldo Lopez landing with the Atlanta Braves a year plus ago. And I think the Mets are hoping for similar success to what Ronaldo Lopez got on a multi-year deal going that we saw to the Atlanta Braves, I believe from the Angels or another team, if I'm not mistaken, a year plus ago. And Lopez was dominant when healthy, being stretched out as a starter for the Braves this past season. Now you enter Clay Holmes, a towering 6'5" right-hander, and the Mets are in business, folks. They are officially in business. So there's the Clay Holmes news, everybody. Really, really like this. He's not going to be a closer. This is another thing for anyone freaking out. Oh my God, this guy blows, saves, yada, yada, yada. Guys, he ain't going to be our closer. It's okay. He's going to be a starting option for the Mets beginning this spring training. And for those that don't remember Clay Holmes, let me enlighten you. Again, he's one of the better relievers in Major League Baseball that the Mets are now going to try their best to stretch into a true starter here. That is the key takeaway with Clay Holmes. He hasn't started since like 2018. Michael, that's the equivalent of saying that, okay, the Padres were dumb for allowing Seth Lugo to become a starter again. How'd that work out for Seth? Oh, the Yankees are stupid for stretching Michael Cain from a reliever into a starter. Oh, that was stupid. Oh, Garrett Crochet going from a reliever to a starter for Chicago. Oh, that was stupid. We could go tit for tat when it comes to this, but this does have success. Spencer Strider, how did he start his career? Newsflash, reliever. What is he now? Dominant starter. I'm not saying that Clay Holmes is going to be a Cy Young candidate next season, but what I am saying is that there's reasons as to why the Mets are viewing Clay Holmes as a starting type. Not only with how steep the pitching market is, but also as how they can view him. And again, as Joel Sherman just tweeted, word for word, verbatim, taking words out of my mouth just now, the Mets' plan is to try Holmes as a starter with a fallback being a setup man for Edwin Diaz. Who is complaining if that is in fact the case? Because Clay Holmes this past season, a 3.14 ERA, a 3.22 expected ERA, everybody. Let's get into the breaking news. That is, Clay Holmes has officially signed with the New York Mets on a 3-year, $38 million deal, right around 12.6 average annual value, as this is part of our live stream that we're already live for, breaking down the latest Big Mets updates on Juan Soto and everything in between the sweepstakes. But now we have to cut away and talk a bit here on Clay Holmes and the acquisition that has him here for the Amazons, and why Mets fans should have optimism here. And while there is, of course, going to be pessimism, especially with a reliever that blew a lot of blown saves this past season for the Yankees to move out of the closer role, fans are initially going to grab onto that and say, I don't like this pickup. But the reality is the Mets are signing Clay Holmes as a starter type with a fallback option as a setup man for Edwin Diaz. Holmes is one of the better relievers in all the American League that we've seen for the past number of years. The towering 6'5", 250-pounder at 31 years of age enters the fall with the Mets after having a 3.14 ERA this past season in 67 games, 63 innings there. We saw a just under 10 K per nine to right around a 3 walks per nine, so a solid K to walk ratio for Holmes. And now you are entering Clay Holmes, where if the Mets can stretch him as a starter, like what we saw with Ronaldo Lopez on an eerily similar contract. Just for some context, everybody, the Atlanta Braves, who have prided themselves in recent history on getting the best out of relievers turned starters, first started with Spencer Strider a couple seasons ago. Then this past year, they pick up Ronaldo Lopez on a 3-year, $30 million deal. The Mets now pick up Clay Holmes on a 3-year, $38 million deal and are hoping for similarity. Ronaldo Lopez was an ace caliber pitcher throughout the first half of the regular season before he dealt with ailment there for the Atlanta Braves. When we look at other starters that became a starter through being a reliever for a while, we look at, again, even former New York Yankee, in which Clay Holmes knows well, and Desi Driscoll, who is now the Mets assistant pitching coach that Clay Holmes actively worked with in 2024 and 2023 at minimum there with the Yanks and Desi. Michael Caine, a fantastic example of a reliever turned starter having success, even getting Cy Young votes now with the San Diego Padres. Former Met, former Padre, now Kansas City Royals Seth Lugo, one of the most dominant starters in all the American League this past season, giving length as a veteran right-hander, going from a starter to a reliever. We look at countless other examples, including newcomers in Garrett Crochet, a dominant southpaw who will likely be traded this offseason by the White Sox, hopefully to our Mets. But all seriousness, Garrett Crochet, a dominant southpaw who started as a reliever, now turned stretched into a starter. The list goes on from there, even in guys, and if I'm not mistaken, Blake Littell, if that's how you say his name there, starter turned as a reliever from the Tampa Bay Rays this past season, former San Francisco Giant for a couple of years. Remember him when he got basically yapping at and was thrown out of the game by Gabe Kapler. They had a testy back and forth when he was pulled off the mound a couple of years ago. Yes, that Littell, he had success against the Mets and others in the American League and that dominant American League East. The point is that there are a lot of fans that are initially going to write off something of this nature, when in my opinion, Clay Holmes, who's been one of the most dominant and one of the more consistent relievers in Major League Baseball, yes, he has blown a bunch of saves, but the Mets don't need him to be a save artist at all. They have Edwin Diaz on that $100 million contract. They need a true setup man, a guy who has been in deep playoff runs, a guy who knows what it takes to win, and a guy who can handle high leverage situations. Even if he's floundered at times, we know that Clay Holmes knows what it takes to win and to step up in New York, and now he has the prime opportunity to do exactly that. This time not in the Bronx with the Yankees and their fans, this time in Flushing, Queens, with former bench boss with the Yankees Carlos Mendoza, recently lateral moved from the Yankees to the Mets there, and Desi Driscoll, Drishel, however you pronounce his last name, our new Mets assistant pitching coach who works heavily on pitch shape. They're going to work tirelessly. That we're going to see with Clay Holmes this year, and I'm damn excited because he's got one of the best sinkers in the game. He's the only guy that is a right-hander at his size, at his frame, that has the kind of peripherals that he has with his sinker there that sits right around, we see 97 miles per hour. He's in the 88th percentile in fastball velocity this past season, Clay Holmes. He's in the 84th percentile in whip percentage, 67th percentile in K percentage, 84th in barrel percentage, 69th in hard hit percentage, 100th in ground ball percentage. Everyone's ground balling in the case of Clay Holmes here. 80th percentile in expected ERA, 86th percentile in break and run value. Fastball run value is in the 20th percentile, so some work there. But again, when you're a sinker, slider, sweeper guy, the triple S's, which we love to call them on the platform, that checks off every box for, yes, you guessed it, Jeremy Hefner, Desi, and yes, of course, Carlos Mendoza, David Stearns. We saw throughout David Stearns' first run with the Mets as Pobo, his first year, what did we see a lot of with relievers and even starters to a degree? A lot of guys had sinkers, they had splitties, they had sweeps, and that is exactly what you're getting here pretty much with a sinker, slider, sweepo trio there with the Mets and Clay Holmes. I love this. I want guys that not only want to play in New York, but want to be here. I want guys that want to be in Queens, obviously. I want guys that hopefully we can see the best out of now as a starter. Clay Holmes is only 31 years of age, and I have a great feeling that he's going to be stretched out as a quality starter for the Mets. And here's the thing, even if Clay Holmes went as a starter is more of a 5 and dive because maybe he really can't handle the length that's going to take to be a starter, which he hasn't been since his 2018 season with the Pittsburgh Pirates, like everyone else. I mean, Garrett Cole, Tyler Glass now, you name it, there's a lot of arms. Trevor Williams, former Mets legend, was a part of the mix there back in the day. But what you bring in Clay Holmes is a man who's looking to bounce back off of what was initially a dominant closer to them becoming a setup man in lesser leverage situations for the Yankees, losing the job to Luke Weaver. He's not getting a chance to really shake things up a bit, get back to being ready, and get back to hopefully now for the first time in his career being a successful starter. And the best part of it all, everybody, and this is why I have such little gripes with something like this for a guy that has right around a flat 3-year ERA over the past 4 years, is that if Clay Holmes does not succeed as a starter, if Clay Holmes does not look right in this position, that is perfectly fine. Why? Because the Mets can just opt to put him back in the bullpen where he's been dominating the past number of years, this time as Edwin Diaz's go-to setup man. So now this completely changes the complexion of the bullpen, and that in fact becomes the case with guys like Danilo Nunez, Jose Budo, etc. The Mets will have to defer to them less should Holmes become a reliever for the Mets at any point in the season. And if this really maxes out, if you really get the success level you're looking for, what does this mean? Clay Holmes becomes a formidable starter in this rotation for the Mets, neither a 5 or a 6-man, in which I do believe that to an extent they may stretch it to be a 6-man rotation, that being in Clay Holmes, mainly because of what we also saw with the peripherals and the numbers with Frankie Montas. So they officially signed to a deal today. They announced he had his presser, I should say, rather, and he's recruiting Sean Manaea that we spoke previously in our live stream on. Right now, the time of recording this 8:26 p.m. December 6th, everybody. I know we got some remarks I'm going to get into in a second, but I definitely want to know your continued thoughts. Molding Clay into a starter. Thank you so much for the donation. I love the wordplay there. That was tremendous. Greg, thank you so much for the gifted membership. That's fantastic. Really appreciate the generosity there, my man. Seems like you're happy in Mets land with Clay Holmes. I also apologize if I missed anyone's comments or specifically donations prior. That is not intentional. Unfortunately, that happens at times, including Jason Busey earlier in the chat. Thank you so much for the $5 holla. I really appreciate that. But Clay Holmes now enters the fold for the Mets here. There's endless familiarity, crosstown rivals between the Yanks and the Mets with Mendoza, Desi, and everyone else in company. They lost Luis Severino. They gained Clay Holmes, so we live to see another day. And again, folks, the Mets are not done adding to their rotation. They're not done adding to pitching. They're going to make more inevitable pitching moves as soon as over the next 24 hours or so before we find out where Juan Soto lands. I'm inclined to believe this will probably be the last big move the Mets make until we find out what happens with Juan Soto. We also hope, obviously, that this is not the only former Yankee that lands in Queens at any point over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. Catch my drift? Clay has that familiarity this past season with Juan. Obviously, the blown saves weren't great, but he can say, Juan, I'm a starter now. You don't got to worry about that, all right? I'll be a 5-and-dive. And even if the Mets go to Clay Holmes as, say, a 5-and-dive pitcher, the reason why that doesn't concern me either, as of now at least, is that they're expected to add more depth in that area. If they land Mike Soroka, which they can utilize as a reliever or a starter, tremendous reliever numbers, horrendous starter numbers this past season, but can be worked on. He's only 27 years of age. That could be a pickup where you have them kind of back-to-back if you want to go about that. Should you want to see how those guys only pitch 4 or 5 innings because you really can't get more out of them. We'll find out how the Mets go about Holmes come spring training there as we get to February. But in the interim, welcome to Queens, Clay Holmes. We were happy to have you here. I know the Yanks didn't love you this past season with the blown saves, but I think we're going to be perfectly fine with your usage. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, you'll go back to being the reliever that you've been this time and not high leverage, high stakes situations every single time like the way you were constantly for a long period of time with the Yankees as their closer for a bit. But guys, let me know your continued thoughts here. Mark Feinstein just tweeted, so the Mets have signed a Yankees All-Star. The question now is whether they will do it again in the coming days. God willing, that is all we can hope for right now, everybody. But let me just double check here to make sure that I didn't miss anything on this front before we continue to break more down. Again, I absolutely love the fact that the Mets were able to land someone as close as what Holmes is, because one thing that David Stearns had a very heavy point of emphasis with that we've heard from the time he first was hired by the Mets at the trade deadline, then leading into now this offseason, is the commonality with not only wanting players who want to be here, but players who have had success in New York, either with the Mets in the past or with the Yankees. That's important. Playoff success, entering playoffs, having a taste of what it's like in the big spotlight is very important. And also having guys that are willing to adapt, willing to adjust, and also a strong personality that is not going to go against what the clubhouse are currently building there for the Mets for 2025. Holmes checks off literally every single box that they are looking for. And I have to give Clay Holmes a lot of credit as well. We know that he's been dominating overall for the Yankees the past couple years, but we have seen this continued story with some guys getting traded, especially from the Pittsburgh Pirates, and say Jameson Taillon, for example, where they have some success there in the Bronx, and then they want nothing to do in New York again. You know, they're less inclined to come back to New York. They rather smaller markets. I give a lot of props to Clay Holmes, a lot of cojones to be staying here in New York, where the big market's going to be big, the media is going to be insane, especially, God willing, if the Mets can go and land his former teammate from the 2024 season, everybody. Let me double check to make sure that I didn't miss anything here. I don't believe that I did, everybody. So yes, you have the sinker, the slider, and the sweeper, which is all fascinating. I do have some more notes they actually want to share here on Holmes when it comes to his sinker in particular. If I can pull it up right now, let me see if I find it at the moment. Sinker, okay. I do have it. Awesome. Okay. And I want to give a big shout out as well. Oh, I'm going to butcher the name. I believe his name is Lance Berzdowski. I apologize if I butchered that a little bit. Lance does a very good job with, advanced information, advanced metrics there when evaluating pitchers. And he, a couple weeks ago, came out with a YouTube video highlighting why he likes Clay Holmes as a starter for 2025. The Mets seem to like that video quite a bit because now they come on to sign him as a said starter. And one thing that stood out a lot to me from this breakdown from Lance is the following, everybody. It's the the high release height is so high, it gets a lot of vertical break on his sinker, which is very rare. Very, very rare for the type of frame and right-handedness that he is. He is the only right-handed pitcher in Major League Baseball, folks. Buckle up, listen to it. Clay Holmes is the only right-handed pitcher in Major League Baseball with a sinker higher than 6.6 feet and below 4 inches of vertical break. Again, he's in a class of his own when it comes to this pitch. When it is deadly, it is perfect. The Mets had endless success when it came to sinkers last year, especially with the Sammon southpaw, in which we would love to see back. That being, and yes, you guessed it, Sean Manaea, utilizing that high sinker in the zone, worked beautifully for him this past season. Clay Holmes has had endless success with the sinker. The sweeper is absolutely lethal, especially to the righty batters when you really get them biting down and away. Now you enter Clay Holmes in the mix for the Mets as they look to continue to make moves, and this is one that I'm far from complaining about. I know some of you guys are going to say, oh, Wardy, he always loves every single thing the Mets do in David Stearns. Here's the thing. I have not really been opposed much of what David Stearns has done so far, and I feel like I deserve some credit for that considering the Mets went 2 games shy of a World Series this past year, in which David Stearns had his hands on a lot of making that happen. The same way David Stearns is going to have his hands on a lot of what the 2025 Mets are going to be and going forward, and Carlos Mendoza. So I'm really in a comfort level when it comes to Stearns, and I have a trust level in him and Mendoza that not only after year 1, but just the optimism level I think should stay consistent. I'm not going to come out here overly pessimistic. Even guys from Frankie Montas, who you think is an overpay at 17 mil AAV, seeing Severino at 22 plus mil AAV, when Montas is projected to have a better season in 2025 than Severino as of now. That's correct per Fangraphs. And should that hold true, who's complaining? No one's complaining. I think David Stearns is going to continue to prove his ability to absolutely take advantage of winning in the margins. Not that he's trying to purposely penny pinch, but rather getting the best out of guys on true value versus constantly overpaying for every guy just to have them come into Flushing, Queens and not want to be here over half the time. There is a different element to this, and David Stearns, Steve Cohen, Carlos Mendoza, the entire group right now are really changing, righting the ship and for the better, and the public perception that the Mets have had over the past couple of years. So everybody, continue to let me know your thoughts in the comments live, and all my replay viewers. How do you feel? Quick reaction here to the following, and Clay Holmes officially signing with the New York Mets on a 3-year, $38 million deal. I would love to hear it. But guys, we are going to continue on to break down more on Clay Holmes as well as the latest with Juan Soto and these sweepstakes. So please just bear with me as I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row there with the content. We're almost at 300 likes as well. If you guys could help us get to north of 500 likes at the end of the live show to our 1,300 concurrent viewers, that'd be greatly appreciated. And thank you all so much in advance for doing exactly that. It really does mean a lot. But all right, guys, let me pull this up real quick and then we will go from there. Holmes as we continue to break down the latest here in Metsland. Thank you so much everyone that's been watching live on a replay. We appreciate you as the Mets have officially signed Clay Holmes, as we mentioned, to a 3-year, $38 million deal. Clay Holmes this past season, as we saw, a 3.14 ERA. The year prior, a 2.86 ERA with a 2.79 expected ERA, over 10 K per 9 or right around 3 walks per 9. Another thing that I like a lot about Clay Holmes, at least from a reliever that we've seen with the New York Yankees the past 3.5 years, is that he has been unbelievably consistent in his K to walk ratio. That has not wavered pretty much at all whatsoever. Bobby, thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate that a lot. But he's been pretty much sitting right around 10 K per 9 to a 3 walks per 9. On his career, he's right north of a 10 K per 9, but a 4 walks per 9. The walk rate's really inflated from his stint in Pittsburgh in 2018 and 2019 before he was properly adjusted from guys including Desi, who is now the Mets assistant pitching coach that we've emphasized, and Montas, 2 Yankee rejects. It's really going to stain for Yanks fans. Same way it was for Severino this past season will be the same way next season, that the Mets get more out of Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes than the Yankees got collectively out of those guys throughout their entire tenure. I'm going to go so far to say that Clay Holmes is going to have a better year for the Mets in 2025 than he ever had for the Yankees as a reliever, because he's going to give the Mets at least 100 innings next season. I'm going to predict right now Clay Holmes gives the Mets at least 125 innings, if not pushing 150 next season. I'm also going to say that Frankie Montas is going to have the best season of his career since his final year in Oakland, when the Mets are officially going to have him in the rotation for 2025. So again, we can go tit for tat all day long. Yanks fans mocking as if we're upset right now. Buddy, You couldn't even figure out your man Luis Severino, your supposed ace for so long, and pair with Garrett Cole. Why didn't it work out? It's almost like you couldn't get his sleep regimen figured out. An easy fix for us, a hard one for you. Can't relate, my friend. Now let's deep dive and get back into this one, shall we? The numbers here, again, as a starter weren't pretty, but they were only 4 starts there and 26 innings, 11 games total in which he was a reliever and a starter. That's why the numbers were so inflated back then. Clay Holmes has really never had a true taste as a starter at the major league level where he's had proper adjustments among other things. So I'm really happy where the Mets can at least try to tap into some untapped potential here and what they're going to get in someone in Holmes. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, okay. Then he is a reliever for you that comes at a price point that is very much in line with him being one of the more dominant relievers in Major League Baseball. 12.6 mil AAV is nothing to scoff at, especially after seeing like Aroldis Chapman get 10.5 mil on a 1-year deal with the Boston Red Sox a day or two ago. So we know that these prices for, higher echelon relievers are expensive, and it makes sense that the Mets are willing to go there the way that they're probably not going to be willing to go there for most other big name relievers in the free agent market, because he means more than to be just a reliever. If the Mets were looking at Clay Holmes as just a setup man, they don't sign him to a 3-year, $38 million deal. That's not why this happened. This happened for the same exact reason why Ronaldo Lopez happened. This happened for the same exact reason why we've seen all these other relievers turn starters in recent history in Major League Baseball. It is saying a lot mostly. If you know, that's funny. How long is his leash going to be before you? I mean, we're going to find that out, Andrew, as we get into spring training. Obviously, the Mets are going to give Holmes somewhat of a leash. Let me put it this way. If the Mets were able to give Adrian Hauser as long of a leash as they did last year, I'd anticipate that they at minimum give Clay Holmes around a similar leash as long as he shows his ability to handle the workload that comes with being a starter. Now, common belief has been throughout the industry with Clay Holmes for the past couple years that he has done such a fantastic job on handling his body to the point that he has also been able to handle a heavier workload. He has set up his yearly regimen as if he's a starter, where he can handle at minimum 100 plus innings, because you're including playoffs as well for Holmes among others. So Clay Holmes has already had that understanding to have his body ready in a proper workload regimen to have him out there as much as possible, as frequent as possible for the Yankees. And now for the Mets, they may want him out there every 4th or 5th day as a starter, and we'll soon find out if that's going to work. If that's not going to work, the trials and tribulations that come with it. But no less, the Mets have themselves a risk here, but the upside far outweighs the risk, because again, the risk is he doesn't work out as a starter, and you can still have yourself a dynamite reliever in this bullpen, which no one would be complaining about for the most part. Our Yankees fans are thinking Mets aren't looking for top starting pitching. The Mets are looking for top starting pitching, but not necessarily in the way that you think. I've stood on this for a while. I do not believe, I'm not one of those people that finds myself in the category where, okay, the Mets absolutely have to sign Corbin Burnes or Max Fried. I would love for it to happen, but I'm not anticipating it to happen. And because I'm not anticipating it to happen is the exact same reason why I will not be shocked if the Mets don't land either. It's because of a couple reasons I'm going to emphasize in just 1 second, everybody. Okay, folks, simply put, why the Mets are not as likely to land Corbin Burnes or Max Fried is a couple factors. I relayed this a lot, but I will again. It's because of factor number 1 that we are very aware of, the compensation picks. The Mets have a reluctance to obviously give up key comp picks, especially with how they are taxed versus others, especially for a Fried or a Burnes. Secondly, the price point of these guys and the term. The price really doesn't mean much, but the term does. Both of them are looking for north of 7+ year contracts, especially Burnes 7-8 years, and at, $250, $300 million total contract of a total value of a contract, the Mets have confidence that they can get similar production, even ace caliber production, out of shorter term options and trade options that aren't going to be as long-term commitment for guys in which the second half of that contract is likely going to age like milk. So that goes in hand with the Mets' thought process and David Stearns and the confidence in their pitching lab. Now, it's important to have a balance. I'm not in favor of the Mets having every starter be a reclamation project, every starter being a guy that's coming off of a down year. Those are not things I'm in favor of, but what I am in favor of is the Mets continue to be an organization that's reliant less on having to ink long-term free agent deals, even for ace caliber starters, if it means that they still have confidence in having a solid, if not strong, rotation for the upcoming seasons because of their in-house talent, what they seek externally on the shorter term end, and how much confidence they have in both their player development and the lab that they're throwing out there. Again, all these factors come into play, but simply put, I am happy where the Mets are currently at. I would love a Corbin Burnes. I would love a Max Fried, but those are both things I'm not exactly anticipating to happen at this point in time. So because I'm not anticipating them to happen at this point in time, I'm not going to beat a dead horse there. Alrighty, folks. First, let's look at this breakdown from my man Isaac Groffman. Then from there, we'll see what happened with John and on the fan. Nolan, great member of 42 months. Do I think Holmes comes out of the bullpen in playoffs? All indicative on how he performs as a starter throughout the season. Way too early to figure that one out because we got to see how he does as a starter first. Good question, though. Okay, here's what we need to hear on Clay Holmes, everybody. Also, shout out as well. Let's see this. Fantastic video breakdown too. Should Jeff Hoffman and Clay Holmes become starters? That was a great video as well from Lance Brzdowski that my man Isaac referenced as well. Lance did such a good job on the breakdown for Clay Holmes. Check out that video too if you haven't already. But here, what makes an intriguing candidate starter? Two big reasons: elite ground ball rates and above average command. These are foundational traits for any successful starter, especially one with Holmes' unique pitch mix. Holmes' ground ball rate is in the 100th percentile at 64%. This elite ability to generate grounders makes him incredibly efficient. The Mets likely believe his efficiency will translate to fewer pitches per inning and deeper starts. Essentially, what the Mets are hoping is that they can get a guy to dominate with the ground ball rate, something that Adrian Hauser tried so desperately to do last year, but simply didn't work out. His pitch arsenal is awesome. He has 3 elite pitches that have outlier movement. His sinker is especially unique with incredible amounts of drop, and it averages 97 miles per hour, making it a unicorn pitch. His slider and sweeper both have more drop than average. And I showed you guys this a couple days ago when we did our initial breakdown on Clay, so this is a lot of the same. The large circles, this is actually to a T what Isaac sent me just in our messages a couple days ago when I first did a video on Clay Holmes to get you guys ready for us now signing him. And any of you schmucks out there, I'll just say this, we got schmucks out there that like to say, Wardy, every player you cover that the Mets are reportedly connected to, they don't sign. So latest example, buddy, within days of the Mets being connected to Clay Holmes, they sign him. Just a couple days. It's almost like they do in fact sign some people that get publicly leaked out there. Who would have thought? I did. Okay, the large circles on this chart by Tim Stats are expected movement for pitchers with Holmes' arsenal. Arm angle. The little dots are actually how his pitches move. See how all the little dots are far from the big circles. This shows how unexpected the movement of his pitches are, which means he's very deceptive, which leads to a lot of not only strong swing to miss, but a lot of ground ball outs and a lot of success for Clay Holmes and a lack of success for the opposing batters. There is one problem. Holmes struggles against left-hand hitters. His pitch mix of a demon sinker and sweeping slider heavily favors right-handed matchups. Fixing this will be key to unlocking his potential as a starter. To address this, and this is a great point by Isaac, he believes that at least 1 or 2 pitches should be added. Working with Tread HQ, Tread Athletics there, he's likely experimenting with a kick change, as they'd like to call it, which is a new version of a changeup that uses a spiked grip to get massive depth. He could also develop a splitter or reintroduce his four-seam fastball, which doesn't profile well right now, but he also doesn't throw it all that much. Another option is a show-me curveball to add variety and keep hitters off balance. These additions will not only improve his splits, but also help him navigate a lineup multiple times, a necessity for starting pitchers. With how expensive pitching is in this offseason, 13 mil AV, not even, it's 12.6 for Holmes is a smart bet. If he transitions successfully to a starter, great. If he doesn't, he's an elite setup man. You can't go wrong here pretty much if you are the New York Mets. So that is all the nice little detailed breakdown from my man Isaac Groffman, our official pitching contributor here on the platform. Make sure to check him out if you guys haven't already. We absolutely love him to death. We really do. But guys, now let's take a look at what was supposedly happening with John Heyman, because I know he was just on the fan for a segment, and apparently something happened there. So let me double check to see what exactly that was. Someone was saying he basically like stormed off. I'm just curious if that's actually true or not. All right, we're going to listen up together, everybody. Hold on. Okay, so this is the supposed clip of John Heyman getting upset on WFAN and storming off. Now, I would like to clarify who is hosting this segment, which is Keith McPherson. I will let you guys have whatever opinions that you want to have on Keith. I have my own, and I'm going to keep them to myself and leave them at that. Let's just hear how this segment goes.
No regrets. It's like at some point, I think someone could probably drop it if they're a nice person.
What I think is it just like how I introduced you. Everybody in baseball knows who you are. So one, it's a credit to your work, your following, and how.
By the way, I won't be going on with you again. The whole thing has been a disaster.
Oh, whoa. Did Keith say that he takes? Okay, well that explains it. Color me shocked. Keith probably said some out-of-pocket things. If he said verbatim that he takes money from Boris, then no shit. that you're going to see John have the reaction he has. Even if it's true, which a lot of people, to myself to a degree, can find that to be true. Between that and now what I'm sure he's referencing, which is Arson Judge, John Heyman quickly blocks people in his comment section that comment Arson Judge to him because of how much that he has to live with that at the end of the day by messing up such a a renowned player in a free agency sweepstake a couple years ago. He will never be able to live that down. People will always know John Heyman for Arson Judge. Sadly, that's the reality when you mess up and you're that not elite, but that upper echelon of a reporter in the public eye. But let's hear further what was said here. This is nuts.
That's okay.
I can't even believe you said that to question my integrity.
Are you being serious right now?
I'm being serious, yeah.
John.
Asking me if I'm getting a cut because I have a relationship with an agent. That's outrageous. I know you're not a journalist. You don't know anything about this. I know you don't. But that's an outrageous comment. You should know that
it's
much.
Friday night at 8:30, John.
You should know that much.
And I am
I'm
not
done with you.
I am not
I'm
taking
done with
this that
WFAN.
serious.
Goodbye.
John, thank you for joining
I can't
us,
even
John.
believe it.
Thank you,
I
John.
can't even believe it.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your time.
That's unfortunate. That's all I'm going to say. That's unfortunate. There is a level of professionalism that goes into this. I think on one hand, I feel like John should have known better, especially when you're dealing with sports radio, the fan, which I've been very fortunate to be on the fan in the past before. And, especially with these talking heads, they're by no means going to go about things in a textbook manner. A lot of them come off more so freely in the way that I do as a fan, that just have more fan-oriented questions than anything. And that is a fan-oriented question. The problem is that this is the fan and not just a fan. And this is the #1 major sports radio network in all New York. So to come out and blatantly say that publicly to him over the phone, on a call live to thousands of people, even if that is in fact true, which we don't know officially if that is or not, we all just joke and like to speculate that is equally asinine to do. There's a lack of professionalism on both hands here, and I'll leave it at that. That is a very, very interesting. It just not ideal whatsoever. I mean, and for Keith, it's common sense. I mean, imagine being that thick-headed to ask such a question, like on air. Like those are things you can't do. Very tough. Okay, now let's get out of that. We did see this earlier, which I found interesting. So, guys, with 1.3 million views and roughly 8,000 likes on X, we have Anthony, a bunch of numbers on X, which says the following. I'm posting this on a burner account so I don't get anyone in trouble. So if you want to take this with a grain of salt, you can. I'm told Juan Soto has made his decision to sign with the Mets at 15 years, $745 million on a creative deal. Announcement, I'm told, will be Sunday. Now, I will just say this. I love the wording by this guy, because even if this is a troll job, which it likely is, this is a fantastic troll job. And also, he's leaving it up to you to interpret it however which way you want to believe. He's not acting like that schmuck of an ass that you call Mick coming out of the Boston's camp over the past week on Thanksgiving, ruining many Thanksgivings for Boston fans and opposing fans that want Juan Soto because, he's landing there in Boston on a 12-year deal. Said my absolute ass, buddy. How about you get some sources, have it smack across the face once in a while before you realize, oh my God, that's actually a source. I didn't know what it was. I was just spewing out nonsense. In the case here of Anthony, a bunch of numbers, I like the fact that he said, I'm on a burner right now so I don't get in trouble, so take this with a grain of salt if you want. I like that he's putting it out there for fans, and I think that's why it's blown up so much. It's because the guy didn't come out in any way, shape, or form of demanding that this is for certain the case. He's just telling you what he's told. So do I think that this is BS? Yes, because until we find out from the horse's mouth himself, that horse being Jet Passon more than anyone else, it's going to be very hard to believe anything on the Soto front with all the controversial reporting that's been going on at this point. But I will say it is hilarious how much this has blown up. This comes a day after we hear supposedly Carlos Mendoza's son break that the Mets offered $700 million at 15 years. Now we're looking at 745. I will say the money's right there. The money's right there. And there's at least 4 teams in the 700 range, according to John Heyman when he was on Bleacher Report earlier. then yeah, it's going to get to north of 750. And as Will Sammon noted brilliantly in our live segment before he had a dip, because the breaking news that we saw on Clay Holmes happen, before he had a dip, he was saying the same sentiment in regards to where he believes that the contract's going to land, north in that 750 range after the rumblings that we're hearing today. So make of that information however you want to go about it. I just want to relate that because, again, it's blown up 1.3 million views or impressions there on X. Just stupid, just absolutely nutty. We also saw Shane Bieber earlier today go back to Cleveland on a 1-year, $14 million deal with a $16 million player option for 2026, which he'll likely opt into. Shane Bieber is making less AAV, but he did turn down bigger money elsewhere, according to John Heyman there, the New York Post, to stay in Cleveland. The Mets made a couple minor league moves today that I want to share as well. They have picked up Sean Harney from the Rays in exchange for cash considerations. Harney topped out in Double-A last year, so he is not a guy that is expected to have an immediate impact. But should the Mets get a crafty arm that you say came out of nowhere that was in the Rays organization, don't be surprised if Sean Harney's name is the one who comes up at any point next season. We also had some other acquisitions that the Mets officially made that I'd like to touch on with each and every one of you. If I can find this here in my notes in a second. Give me 1 second, folks. It was from the Mets Twitter themselves. Where did they put it? Where did I put it? It's the big question. Let's find this out together. Hold on, everybody. Appreciate the patience here. Where are you? Okay, we have signed a right-hand reliever, right-hand pitcher, Grant Hartwick, who we talked about on the channel a couple days ago when that was announced, because that's multiple days old. It just wasn't official yet. And they've also signed Edward Olivares to a minor league contract. Alex Ramirez as well, former Mets top outfield prospect who has sadly fallen far from grace. But let's now look at what is Edward Olivares, because who do not know Edward, he has been in Major League Baseball since the 2020 season. He has been on 4 teams throughout that stretch, and he's honestly the latest quality outfield AAA pickup the Mets landed. What do I mean by quality, you might ask, Wardy? Well, it's imperative for teams that are on the cusp of obviously having playoff aspirations or World Series aspirations to have great depth in the farm, to the point where if, say, guys go down with injury, you can defer to some guys that come in as either 4th, 5th, 6th outfield options, but guys are still MLB-esque caliber. In the case of Edward, he is a guy that would be getting more consistent reps coming off the bench or potentially as a 4th outfielder in a different organization. But for the Mets there, after having a 224 average, a 291 on-base percentage, and a 331 slug last season, and 55 games with Pirates, including 5 home runs and 23 RBIs, he's just a year removed from a 263 average, a 317 on-base percentage, and a 452 slug in 107 games with the Kansas City Royals. 12 home runs, 47 runs scored, 11 stolen bags, and we're looking at a guy that has around a career 93 WRC+, so 7% better than 7% worse than the average batter in baseball. This is the latest Ben Gamel-esque type pickup for the Mets, where they're going to have an immediate MLB-esque option to call up, God forbid, should injuries happen in their outfield. Say Tyrone Taylor, Jose Siri, those types go down, and Drew Gilbert isn't ready to step up to really play the way that we hope he can in a consistent role as a rookie. You want to make sure you have as many MLB quality depth as possible getting into AAA for a team like the Mets in 2025, and now they have landed more of exactly that, barring changes should Edwards still make the team out of spring training and begin the season there in AAA Syracuse with the Mets. Be on the lookout, as we will inevitably have more content coming out tomorrow. At minimum, a video and or live stream. At maximum, multiple of 1 or 2 of those things. Might have a couple videos, might have a live stream too, might have multiple live streams if there's back-to-back, breaking news happens, what have you. Be on the lookout for all the latest in these Soto sweepstakes, as we're going to follow on to a T like we have all off-season long, officially locked in on Soto Watch as he looks to make his decision this weekend. Thank you guys again for watching. Clay Holmes is a Met at 3 years, $38 million.